Hi, and welcome to episode 5 of my podcast series, Social Distancing the Church. And as you notice, again this week, I'm splitting them up into two parts because it just makes it more accessible having multiple shorter chunks. So this is episode 5A, the tech portion, with Rev Jorin Green of Erindale Alliance. He has been the lead pastor there since May 1st, so he's been coming in right in the midst of this. And before that, he was teaching theology at Miller that's in Manitoba, correct?
I was at the BC campus. We have a campus opening in Winnipeg and campus in southern Saskatchewan.
Okay. And the current stage of reopening here in Saskatoon is 4.2, so that's religious gatherings are capped at 150, I do believe. Yeah. And then there's a bunch of other conditions that go along with that, like singers have to wear masks, and I know some of this, I'm just blanking on them. And then like leaving and exiting in different doors, or leaving and entering in different doors. So while our gathering sizes are relatively big right now, we've still got a lot of restrictions we have to be careful of. Is there anything else you want to add in on that?
There's you've kind of hit on some of the key ones. That the social distancing, the enforced social distancing, has been particularly challenging to work through because of the mandatory distances you need. And if you've got larger groups, that distance changes. Because you can have a family core where you get 8 or 10 people sitting together because they're in a cluster, but then you actually have to leave extra distance. So it's been cumbersome to try and work through.
Yeah. So to kind of start off on the tech, it's a bit tricky because you weren't at Erindale when they were switching over to online, but you probably know more of what went on. So how did Erindale approach not being able to hold services in person?
The first Sunday, we actually did it live in sanctuary. So ran basically a normal service with the worship team on the platform, preacher, video camera quite a ways away, where we traditionally would have run it. We have had some online presence in the past, not a significant one, but we would post the sermons, within a couple of days of every Sunday post-production. We get them online. For that I believe it was March 15th, was that first Sunday where we said to the congregation, no one in attendance, just the worship team was here. And then as the situation was evolving very, very rapidly, the decision was made probably within a couple of days of that service that we would shift everybody to their own home. So our worship teams have been recording in their living rooms. They have typically been a family unit where you'll have somebody either on a guitar or more often on the piano and a couple of vocals, shoot the video with the audio, typically on an iPhone or an Android device, and then it goes to our tech team for post-processing. First couple of sermons were done in office. Typically, I'm talking to you on my laptop. We didn't like the effect that we got with that. So our initial was just kind of the scramble of we're going to do what we can, iPhones, laptops, individual pieces, and then bring it together. And then that whole process evolved, of course, as time's run on.
So how did it evolve? Like, where are you kind of at now?
Well, actually, last night was our first big shift. We were back in the sanctuary for the first time since the 15th of March, recording. We had the worship team, social distancing, which was a little bit odd. We had tape markers on the floors, new video camera positions up in the balcony area, new lighting up to try and enhance our video. We did quite a bit of work on the audio because we were set up for live service. You're not set up for recording. You're not set up for this internet feed. And people don't realize, but what you need for video is different from what you need from live situations. And what you need for audio in a live situation is different from recorded. Because, for example, with the piano, you hear the piano, it's got that ambient noise coming off the sound box. If it's not properly mic'd, you don't get it. And in a live situation, you take into account the piano's natural volume as part of that overall sound. You're a sound guy, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so we overcoming challenges like that. Our evolution, the biggest change we made was to move the recording of the sermon and the hosting of the service up into kind of a makeshift recording studio in our library, create a little bit more aesthetically pleasing backdrop. So it looked a little bit more homey. We had a chair there, brought some lighting in to keep the lighting consistent, a lot of natural light. One of the really kind of frustrating pieces, because of the type of glasses I wear, we got a lot of glare off of it, so I had to get used to wearing bifocal contact lenses, which don't work. They don't sound awesome because they're not. But had to go to that just because we couldn't even see my eyes because of the glare. But, you know, make some of those adjustments to try and get a better quality product. Fortunately, one of our tech guys actually worked for years with CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and has fairly extensive background in lighting and video. And then I've got some other folks who have put a lot of time in, very musical, put a lot of time in learning the sound side, researching what do we need for lights. And so I've got a tech crew that is well-rounded, and they've been able to kind of pull a package together we've been fairly happy with it. I think a lot of our folks were pleasantly surprised that the music sounds decent. We wanted back at the sanctuary because we know that recording on an iPhone is never going to be as good. And certainly the video quality, our video quality has been actually very, very good, but trying to get back in the sanctuary where you can see the whole worship team and the lighting is right and that. So we've been working hard on that, pulling a lot of hours.
Yeah, like because as I was preparing for this, I went and watched one of your services, and it was just a couple playing in their living room, and I looked at it and I was like, this is pretty good quality. Like, for the most part, it's just what I assume was a USB mic sitting on a coffee table, and it sounded good. And now that you told me it's shot on iPhone, I wouldn't have guessed, partially because phone cameras are now quite good, but like, it was a well-produced video.
And that comes courtesy, I've got a tech department who has really worked hard at doing some of those kinds of things. And so everything gets washed through computer. I'm not sure how many hours it takes after we do the recordings before they're ready to post them. But yeah, I was really surprised at the quality as well. Now and again, the sound quality is a bit of a challenge depending on where the phone's set relative to the instruments. Pianos in particular can be challenging.
Yeah, and just kind of as you were saying, you get so used to the room sound, because like here at Westgate, we have 6 mics on our drum kit that most of our sound techs hardly use, because we're we're not a small room, but we're not a huge room either. So like, you get a drummer who's a little bit enthusiastic, and acoustically it can carry. Like, it doesn't take much, and so it's thinking, how do I mix all these drum mics we have? Because you can't go off the room sound anymore.
No. Our solution, we're going to cheat, and I think we're going to go to electric drums, which I know purists are horrified by. Having been a touring musician with the college for years, leading worship teams, I actually kind of like them because they're just so much easier to blend into a sound mix, especially when you're recording.
Yeah. So. Drums is always one that, but yeah, it's kind of thinking through, because doing sound on a stream versus live, Westgate's now in a hybrid service where we live stream and we have people, and so you're doing both, and they're 2 completely different areas. So now that you're back in the sanctuary, are you switching to live streaming, or are you just still doing pre-recorded out of your sanctuary?
We have no interest at this time in doing live streaming. We were just actually discussing the logistics. We're doing an incremental. So last night there were, I think, 10 or 12 of us in the building. Next week we'll probably have a few more. Our goal is to incremental and work our way back, that in the fall we'll have our cap at 150, assuming the rules don't change and restrictions aren't shifted on us again. So what we're looking at with those incremental changes is adding pieces and streamlining so that we could do an entire service in one take. Last night we did a series of takes because we're working through some soundboard issues because of that difference between live and recorded sound. But our goal is to move to a live recorded service that then is run through post-production and will be aired either hours or a couple of days after the fact to allow us. We don't feel that with our technology, with our manpower, and with the various pieces we've got, we don't feel we can really do justice to a live stream. And having talked to some of the other churches and some of the horror stories where the live stream goes down midstream, we've made the decision we're going to go to a pre-record. And so we will record the service with the congregation there, but then people will just have to wait a delay until the service is prepared digitally.
Yeah, because like I've done live streaming both at Westgate and at Ambrose. I was live streaming, and while there's benefits to it, there's sometimes where you start streaming and all of a sudden you're only streaming every 30th frame, and that's just completely unusable. Because I had that happen, and I was like, we got about 3 minutes in, and then I just had to be like, guys, we've got to kill this. I don't know what we're going to do, but we can't continue streaming. Because streaming does have that air of unpredictability. And then if your stream goes wrong, then what do you do? Because you've got nothing prepared.
Yeah. And that's where we've made the decision for us and our situation. We just don't feel that the benefits, and there's some huge benefits. Live streaming would be a blast. There's some huge benefits in terms of everyone feels connected and some of those things. It means when the service is over, you're done. But for us, where we're at, what we've got to work with, we just don't feel that the benefits are worth the investment. You know, maybe down the road, the tech, and I leave a lot of that in the hands of our tech crew, because they're the ones who have to carry that work, and they are, you know, the amount of hours that goes in is just staggering to me. For me, COVID hasn't been a big deal. I mean, the same length of time to preach a sermon if I'm on camera like we are right now, if I'm in the sanctuary like I was last night. My world hasn't changed a whole lot. It just maybe changes what day that we record on. We record Wednesdays, for example, to prep for 11 days ahead. And with some of that lead time, you know, maybe the tech guys will decide we're going to go live stream. If they do, great. But I'm really leaving it up to them because they're the ones who have to carry the work, and they're shouldering a heavy load well.
But, yeah, and like pre-recorded, it takes a lot more time to set up a live stream and get everything working. Because like for Westgate, I was helping, and like at one point, it took us like 2 days to set our video switcher up.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I've Ambrose did online chapels for their spring semester, and I edited those, and that's a day or two of editing as well. So
yeah,
neither of them are time efficient.
I think your time is pretty similar. I actually think probably once you got into a flow and got everything set up, that your live stream probably has less hours of overhead, but more points where something could go drastically wrong.
Yeah. So what is the process for you guys of producing a pre-recorded service? Like, you've kind of hinted that you record on Wednesday, but kind of what happens from there? And for editing as well, did you guys have somebody who edited before, or is there somebody who's learning on the fly how to edit?
So in the past, what Erindale did prior to my arrival, we would record the sermon only, and that would be post-processed through, it'd be washed through a software package to get the color up and make sure that the sound is good, and cut it down to just the sermon and those kinds of components, and then it would be posted. Post-COVID, or during COVID now, our process is we record each individual piece. Last night was the exception where we did the worship package and the sermon in one package with breaks, because we were tweaking the soundboard and making some adjustments to the lighting and those kinds of things. But what would happen, what's been happening is the worship team will cut their songs individually and then they'll be spliced together. The scripture reading is done separately, typically on an iPhone again. We do welcome and announcements a couple of days ahead. In fact, that'll be recorded for this Sunday. This Sunday is the 13th? No, it doesn't sound right. Whatever this Sunday is, 12th, 11th of July. So the hosting will be done for this Sunday today, so that we're only a couple of days ahead to try and keep current, because this Sunday's sermon was recorded last Wednesday. And the recording I did last night, which was the 8th of July, that is going to be our, July 19th service. And so that allows our folks time to go through and edit each piece so that they're not panicking. We don't want to get it to them Friday and the service has to go out Sunday. By giving them that lead time, they'll get ahead of it on a couple of days. And so if something needs to be re-recorded, we've given ourselves that lead time, because our whole tech department's all volunteer. The gentleman who does the videoing when we're doing the recording studio up in the library is retired, and he's been very gracious with his time. The actual post-processing, and he does some processing and some inserting of slides. Then it goes to another family who runs it through a computer system. And I'm sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head. They just switched software packages. But both the sermon recording and our final editing are now done in the same software package. And they go through and they splice everything together and they line up the audio tracks and make sure that the video feed looks good. We've got another couple of people involved that all of our PowerPoint for the worship and also for the sermon are outsourced to a couple of other people, and they create the slides that are superimposed. So during worship, along the bottom, you'll see the song words, not over top of the worship people, but kind of underneath it, but clearly there. And then for the sermon, we've gone to slides in both Chinese and English, because we've got a fairly large ESL group in our congregation. Many of them are Chinese as first language, and so we started doing our slides in Chinese for them. And so all these pieces wind up filtering through one final computer process, and then that service gets posted Sunday morning. But it takes them, I think, about 6 or 8 hours. But at least it was. Maybe that process is shorter now, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think one of the really smart things you guys have done is, instead of editing for this week, you're editing for a week in advance. Mm-hmm. Because I've done some editing where I'm up until midnight scrambling on my edit. And so having that week and a half to do it, well, it's not a full week and a half, because also in that week and a half you have to do next week's as well, but like having it a bit ahead of time, you can look at it, or worst cases, they get given a video and they're like, this file got corrupted, can you do a reshoot? And then you're not doing time pressures on reshoots and stuff like that. So it seems like your week and a half thing, it's something simple, but on the tech side, if I was editing, I'd be like, yeah. As soon as somebody would suggest that to me, I'd be like, that's the way to go.
Absolutely. The irony is that we haven't really needed it. We've only had kind of one worship song where we're looking at going, do we reshoot it or don't we? We had just a simple lighting issue. Aside from that, we actually haven't needed it, but it has meant there's been no late night last push to get it ready for Sunday morning. And I've been adamant, because we've got volunteer tech folk, that we need to be really careful that we're not putting too much of a strain on them. And we need a system that's sustainable. You know, I think if you get into the bigger churches where you'd have a full-time tech team, you're into a different scenario there where it's their job and they have it. But all these folks have jobs, all these folks have other commitments. And so we're trying to really honor them. And there's huge sacrifice. There's no way, if we didn't have the crew that we've got doing all the things they're doing, be it the worship, be it the sound guys, the lighting, the video, rise and fall on their sacrifice. So, and the week and a half, we got lucky because there was a Sunday where Dr. Vanderwall, the district superintendent, was preaching for us, and it created an opportunity where I could just do another sermon. And then he sent his in, and that allowed us to shift everything a week ahead. And one of the worship teams graciously offered to do 2 sets that week. And 1 set was used for the incoming Sunday, and 1 set gave us our 11-day advantage.
Yeah.
So now we're trying to figure out, what do we do when we've got people Sunday morning recording a Sunday morning? What's that going to look like with this 11-day lead time? So we haven't figured it out yet.
So another struggle with the online services is maintaining community. Churches are figuring out, when you can't meet in person, how do you foster a sense of community? So what kind of strategies has Erindale been doing to try and keep an online community?
That's been a work in progress for us. When COVID first hit, we had a call network for our seniors. So we've got a good percentage of seniors that call this church home. We were calling them every few days or once a week or fairly regular to maintain an in-person touch, be it over the phone, and a devoted prayer list for them. We've done a couple of major Zoom events. We actually had our annual meeting on Zoom. Our annual meeting falls in late June. We have to have it legally, so we just went ahead and did it. We were able to figure out a way of doing our voting in Zoom, and it worked remarkably well. And that was a nice touch, because then people could see each other and kind of know everybody was there. With our ESL program, it's kind of been at the forefront a little bit with COVID, because they've kept teaching, but we've moved it to Zoom and developing some strategies for how can we use Zoom to at least have a sense that somebody else is out there. And the overwhelming response has been, yes, it's positive, and no, it's not a replacement for in-person. We did communion a couple of weeks ago online in Zoom in real time. We're doing a workshop right now that we're teaching in-house, and that's every Sunday morning. And so again, people are meeting and they can see each other, and there's some interaction happening. It's really brought up the possibility or the question around, what do we need to do to facilitate, maybe smaller groups of pockets. We don't have a small group program, for example, at Erindale at this time. We've got a lot of ministries going. That's not one of them, but it's raised the question of, how do we leverage the ministries, or are there some shifts we need to do? Because Zoom is great, but for a lot of folks, they say it's not the same.
Yeah.
Not in person. We don't see each other. Then when you do get into a situation where there's social distancing, we discover that even in person's a lot harder right now than a lot of people would have anticipated until you try it. You suddenly find you're 6 feet apart, and somebody offers you their hand. You shake their hand. Don't you shake their hand? What do you do with the person you always hug every time you see them, and now you've got to stay 6 feet apart? So this is actually a real big work in progress for us, and we've got a team that's discussing it. The staff's discussing it as well. We haven't solved it, and I'm not sure it's anything any church solves. I think it's more of an ongoing conversation piece to realize we need personal contact. But so we've been using Zoom primarily, and kind of asking, are there other things we need to enhance to help? And encouraging where it's safe and appropriate for those small groups, now that there are some restrictions that have lifted over smaller groups meeting, especially with the summer now, people could be outdoors.
Yeah, and what you said, like, you don't think any church has. I don't think really any church has, but like each church is kind of taking their own individual approach, because it is something that has to be contextual. But at times there's like, this church is doing this thing and another church is doing another thing, and it's like, if you combine those two ideas, what would that look like? But people, so that's kind of why I've been having these conversations. It says all these different approaches that really interest me. So how are you going to keep an online presence going forward? The new normal after COVID restrictions is probably going to have a higher reliance on the internet. At least that's my prediction, is people are going to want more stuff on the internet as they're using it more. So how are you planning to carry forward Erindale's online presence now that you've established one?
Our plan is, as that transition happens to kind of a hybrid of people in the sanctuary with a post-service posting, uploading of the service video. Our plan is long-term, what we've kind of established now with the recording of the whole service and capturing it, that we're going to continue. The patterns that we're establishing now are being established with the thought that in 5 years, this will be the template for what we're going to keep doing in the future. We've got a fairly large senior population, and some of them have, there's physical challenges, even when COVID's off, of getting to service, but they still want to be a part, and realizing to properly honor those folks. There's things we can do to make Sunday morning accessible to those who can't be here in person. And so one of the blessings of COVID has been to force us to rethink how much time and effort we put in. Previously, we didn't do a lot with our online service. Now our online service is going to have a much higher profile in the overall package of what we do. So my anticipation is 5 years from now, it'll look very similar to what's going to look like this fall, where you'll see people in the congregation, you'll get it a day or two late, but you'll have the whole service, and the quality of the recording will be tailored so that you don't feel like you're getting leftovers. You don't feel like, well, the video's not very good, the sound, I couldn't quite hear it. No, you'll get a good sound, you get a good picture, so that if you can't be there in person, you still feel connected and cared for.
Yeah, and two things I kind of want to draw from that is like, even though you guys are doing pre-recorded, you're like, we can still do a hybrid service, because at least how I've always thought of it is you have to be live streaming to do a hybrid service, but you're kind of flipping that and be like, you can do a hybrid service, it's just the online version's a day later after we do post, which that's a smart idea I haven't considered. Secondly, the idea of not be or doing online for those who can't be physically present. I've always heard, or that's the conversation I'm hearing a lot, as like people previously they were traveling so they'd miss church, but if you're online they can still come to church even if they're in another city for business or something.
Yeah, and we want them cared for, but as I say, we've got an aging congregation. Every congregation's aging, but quite a few are in moving towards care homes and that, and being able to provide an opportunity for them to still be part of the church family is huge.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have really felt we had a lot of good options, or we would take a CD recording of just the audio of the sermon. That was done for years, but we've got an option now to do something that's a little bit more immediate, a little bit more, I think a little bit more effective, given the technology that we've now got.
And another thing is, like with the CD, that only works if you know about the people, right? Like if it was a CD, you had to physically get it to them. Whereas being online, they just have to know about it and then they can do it. And the church doesn't have to track down everybody to get them to service. So that's another big benefit.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of churches have discovered they've got a bigger viewership than they would have anticipated, and it's coming from places they didn't know. Our ESL program, we're getting students from all over North America now because we've moved it online. They've maybe moved away from Saskatoon, have friends here, or they've got friends in the program and they're invited in. But even looking at where our videos are being watched, it's outside of Saskatoon. We're starting to get people who are joining us for service, or outside of our normal congregations. So,
you think about it, if your views are matching your congregation size, you have bigger people watching, because a family of 5, they register as one view probably because they're all watching it together. So it's kind of, if you think about it, if your views are matching your congregation size, it's actually bigger, which is fascinating because I think a lot of churches are having higher views than their congregation size.
That's exactly it. And so there's, and that's quite a few of them have talked about, got a congregation of 300 and 450 views. And then you start doing the math and realize but it's hard to figure out where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So,
what do you see as the future of technology in worship going forward? We've been in this season, there's been a further reliance on tech in our worship services. And so, how do you predict the church will negotiate the relationship with technology?
I'm not sure where it's going to go. I got into computers in 1985. I've been a tech guy for quite a while. I think the church sometimes swings through a pendulum a little bit where the tech becomes really important to us and then it falls away and then it becomes really important to us. I think we're in one of those upticks right now where tech is kind of forefront of our thinking because COVID's forced us to find new ways of doing things. And tech is the only, our technology infrastructure is the only thing creating those opportunities. I think we're going to see with the tech kind of two streams emerge. One that's really loving, oh, we can do this and we can do this and we can do this, and really pushing the bounds on what can be done. And I think we're going to see a second stream that's going to push back a little bit and say, we can't replace authentic relationship with the technology. And one of the tensions I've seen as a tech guy at times is sometimes the tech becomes our focal point, not a means to an ends, but it becomes an ends. And I think right now we're kind of in tech as an ends. And I think we're going to see a little bit of a course correction there with a lot of churches where they're going to engage with the technology as a means to an ends and not be so concerned about what can we do, what's cutting edge, but just simply what's effective. But I think for some churches that have avoided tech, they're going to find they've actually cut out a piece of fellowship, because tech does create opportunities. Whether we like them or not is irrelevant. I hear a lot of people go, well, we don't like Zoom. I get that. Zoom meetings have significant trouble, but at the same time, the option is no relationship. Okay, then maybe we will do Zoom. So I think it's going to be kind of this interesting hybrid. But I think the big challenge is for the church not to replace tech as the ends, but use it as a means. And for churches at different levels, I'm typically been a small church guy. For smaller churches, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the in-house expertise, but find that tech has, as these technology changes have happened, Zoom is remarkably accessible. You don't need to have a lot of technical ability. You don't even need to have really good computers for it. And yeah, like I think what you guys do at Westgate, if I'm understanding, you've got multiple camera angles and you're doing some really neat stuff with video switching and that. That's great. You don't have to do that. If you can, it is better. But for churches to even embrace, this is the level that we've got the expertise for. And again, it's a means to an ends and not lose sight of that ends.
Well, like even at Westgate, while we do have all this a nice switcher and stuff, you look at the first few ones and they're choppy. Like it's
yeah.
We have it now, but the first probably month or two we didn't. It was just Westgate decided to really invest in this as they're kind of in a special circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting, like with Zoom, like it is crazy accessible. Like I was talking with Bryce of Westlife for last episode, and their prayer meetings, they used to do in-person prayer meetings. Almost nobody showed up. During COVID, they switched it to Zoom. So many more people showed up, and they're kind of thinking, we're probably not going to go back to in-person because people are actually showing up on Zoom and they weren't in person.
Yeah.
Right? There's that accessibility to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Jorin, for your insights into the tech behind Erindale and their online services. And I recommend every one of you to watch the theology part as well, because he was a theology prof at Miller. So the theology side of it is interesting, and I recommend you watch part B now, which I will have the link in the description.